Adeline Virginia Woolf Stephan was born January 25, 1882 in England. Her big family belonged to the intellectual middle class of London. Virginia had 3 siblings. Due to Victorian traditions, the girls were not allowed to go to school. They were schooled by their parents and private teachers. This was something Virginia was extremely mad about. Luckily for Virginia, her father was a famous literary critic. For that reason, he had a great library full of books that Virginia would read. All the Stephan kids were encouraged to write, and so between her 9th and 13th year, she started to write all sorts of things. Virginia was only 13 years old when her mother passed away. On top of that, Virginia's half-brother sexually harassed her. This led to the First Depression. 2 years later, her sister Stella passed away, and 7 years later, Virginia's dad passed away. After both losses, she went into Great Depressions. At the initiative of Virginia's sister, she and her siblings moved to Bloomsbury, where their house becomes a meeting place for intellectuals. In 1906, Virginia's brother dies. After his death, a large group of friends and intellectuals forms the Bloomsbury Group. At the age of 30, Virginia marries Leonard Woolf, with whom she has a marriage without children.
There are a few elements that were characteristic during the modernist literary movement with the focus on the rejection of traditional ways of writing. Most of them can also be seen in Woolf's work and are related to the subjects she wrote about: consciousness, individuality versus the collective, urban daily life, writing, and the position of women. First and most importantly, she uses the famous stream of consciousness, an endless stream of thoughts, feelings, and sensations that are used to portray the uncontrollable human mind.
My death is the one experience I shall never describe. Someone has to die in order that the rest of us should value life more.
It enables us to feel connected with the characters, even when Woolf is using the third-person narrative mode. Secondly, she plays with the instruments used in her work. She mixes the past and the present, the thoughts of the characters and those of the writer. She changes between a reporting way of writing and stream of consciousness technique. The rejection of traditions is noticeable here. Furthermore, she had the ability to observe daily life and transform something ordinary into the most interesting and admirable thing. She wrote about Mrs. Dalloway, for example, an ordinary housewife instead of a noteworthy character. Woolf has also written numerous diaries and essays about the position of women and how one should write and read a book. Her thinking is intertwined with her writing, which makes her one of the most influential writers of that time.
On account of her mental instability, she is temporarily hospitalized. On September 1913, when under threat of further hospitalization, she takes an overdose and has her stomach pumped. Her ill health continues intermittently for the rest of her life. After her first novel, The Voyage Out, she began writing a diary, more or less continuously until her death. Virginia published her second novel, Night and Day, 2 months after she and Leonard moved to a house closer to her sisters. After living there for 5 years, they decided to move back to Bloomsbury. In 1925, she brought out one of her most famous titles, Mrs. Dalloway. Woolf also concerned herself with the question of women's equality with men in marriage, and she brilliantly evoked the inequality of her parents' marriage in her novel To the Lighthouse, which she wrote in 1927. Woolf based the main characters on her parents.
Woolf's vision of the social issues of the early 20th century is clearly reflected in most of her work. Woolf wished desperately to raise the status of women in her society and wrote many essays in which she explained why this is important and how we can accomplish this. She recognized the problem was largely down to money, and women had less financial and intellectual freedom. Woolf was convinced that men and women are just the same, and gender doesn't really say anything. This she shows by switching the protagonist's gender through the story in her novel Orlando, creating an androgynous ambiguity. She saw sexuality and gender as fluid. Not only was Woolf a feminist, she was also a pacifist, meaning that she strived for peace and opposed war and violence. In her book-length essay, 3 Guineas, she discusses her view on war and feminism together.
Virginia has had a long history of mental illness and breakdowns. She even tried to kill herself by jumping out of a window at the age of 22. The window just wasn't high enough to cause serious damage. During the war, Virginia suffered from a lot of anxiety. Leonard, her husband, was Jewish, and there was always the possibility the Nazis would come to capture him. This is why Leonard and Virginia discussed committing suicide together. They would want to poison themselves with a car exhaust. The couple would always have some extra car petrol in the garage, just in case. Virginia was known for breaking down after publishing a book. She was very afraid of critics. Leonard remembered her rewriting as something with a kind of tortured intensity. Eventually, in 1941, during the time that Virginia worked on Between the Acts, Virginia went to the river the Ouse in Sussex, filled her pockets with stones and walked into the river. Her body was found weeks later by the police. She did leave a heartbreaking suicide note to Leonard. Here she stated something she already said for years. If anyone could have saved me, it would have been you. Everything has gone from me with the certainty of your goodness. I can't go on spoiling your life any longer. I don't think 2 people could have been happier than we have been.